Okay, thank you. So so the second presentation I prepared is about getting a data science job. So it's not specifically about OLX, and then I have a disclaimer here that this is not a description of the interview process. It's more like all my experience of looking for a job and then being on the other side, interviewing people. So I put all this together in one presentation and want to share it with you. I hope you'll find it useful. The plan is for this presentation is like the algorithm, how you go about looking for a job, then how a data science interview looks like, what are the possible stages there, and then what happens after the interview. So the algorithm for job search is quite simple. Well, when you talk about this, it's actually a lot of work, but the steps that you need to do, they're pretty clear. So I broke it down into 4 steps: network, apply, build, and interview. So network is you go on LinkedIn, connect to people. Not just LinkedIn, you can also do this on meetups everywhere. Then you apply to a job. Then you do pet projects, you share them on the internet, and then you interview and you note what's asked and try to be better in this, and then you repeat. So for networking, go to LinkedIn, connect to everyone you know already, and also connect to people you don't know. That's totally fine on LinkedIn. So try to find people from your university, from the bootcamp you graduated, from other bootcamps, people from your city, people who work in the field where you also want to work. Just connect to everyone and then try to talk to them, ask them how they landed the job. So if it's somebody who is junior, hired after a bootcamp, definitely talk to them and ask how they did this. And also if it's somebody who is a junior, just recently hired from a bootcamp, definitely ask if they have other open positions, because chances are that they do. And then find it out and then try to apply. And then often they will be happy to refer you, because in many companies they get a referral bonus if they refer somebody who is hired. And then of course, be active and share content on LinkedIn. This way you will get noticed easier. Then you probably know what are the places where you can find a job in Berlin. What are the websites where you need to go? The important thing there, when you look at the job listing, apply anyways, regardless of what you see. Because often you see something like this: strong understanding of the state of the art, significant experience in tech industry, a role model. So things like, feels like, okay, this is like a superhuman. And it actually is, because these descriptions are typically, they describe a perfect candidate, and this candidate often doesn't exist. So they just, a company hiring manager has a perfect candidate in their head, and then they put a description of this, but they will have troubles finding this perfect candidate. And when you see something like this, of course, the first thing you might think is, okay, that's too good, I am not that. You should apply anyways, regardless of how difficult it seems, and how, if you think that you're not qualified, you should apply anyways. Because the companies, they see, okay, we cannot find this perfect candidate, so this candidate is also fine. And then when you look at the job listings, you should note what they ask, and think how you can be a better match for them. So for example, in this job posting, there is an LTK. I don't know if an LTK is covered at Spiced or not, but you can just take this, take a note, and if you see this NLTK pops up in many job postings, then probably you should learn it, and then you can just do a small pet project around this. And then maybe TensorFlow or Keras, you see that it appears quite in many listings. So then you just take a note and then do a project about this. So for example, you want to build a project about an LTK. So you have an idea how you can use it. So you do some research and find a data set and you train a model, and then you don't stop on that. You put the code on GitHub and then write a blog post. It doesn't have to be a blog post. It can be a small description, like a README file in your GitHub repo. It can be a small presentation, but the important thing is to somehow summarize all the like entire project and then let the world know about this. Publish it somewhere. Publish it on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Medium, whatever. And this way, when you iterate, you get noticed, and then you'll acquire some skills along the way. And when you actually apply to a job, some of them will not answer, some of them will answer. And then you shouldn't worry about the interview because it's not an exam. It's actually two ways, because it's not just the company who assesses you, you also assess the company. So it's sideway. And you should do as many interviews as you possibly can. So apply everywhere, and if somebody agrees, go there and interview. Because you need to practice. And then from every time you interview, after the interview, try to remember what the questions you got and somehow write them down. And then after each interview, try to think, do some sort of retrospective. Did you like the questions the answers you gave, or maybe there is something that you can do better next time? Then if you have a document like this with all the questions, then you can always come back and then see if some questions repeat, if you're improving or not. And then important that rejections are fine. You'll be rejected from like saying, hey, sorry, unfortunately, we decided not to hire you. That's totally fine. And then there can be millions of reasons for that. So you shouldn't take them personally. Sometimes just a company hired a different candidate. Sometimes they just realize they don't have money to hire a person. Sometimes company can went bankrupt. So this is totally fine. And so just you shouldn't take rejections personally. Just keep interviewing. So let's look at actual interviews. So there are many steps in the interviews. So there can be initial call with recruiter, then tech screening with theory, coding, screening, home assignment, case study interview, system design interview, behavioral interviews. Then there can be a call with hiring manager. There can be many things. Not all the companies have all the steps, not necessarily in this order, but this is what these are the steps that tend to happen. So the first call you'll have with the company is initial call with a recruiter. So it's just a general introduction from the recruiter, what the company is doing, what the position is about, and then they ask you to tell about yourself. And then you should keep in mind that recruiters aren't technical, but they can ask technical things, and you shouldn't. Your replies shouldn't be too technical, because at the end they aren't technical. They just want to do some initial screening to understand if they should show your CV to the hiring manager or not. So you shouldn't get into technical details, just some intuitive answers when they ask something. And then they also often ask about salary expectations and about your questions. So it's a good idea to prepare a small introduction about yourself, and then when a recruiter asks about yourself, you just tell this story. So prepare this story, a few sentences, and then just learn it by heart. And then it will be easier, and then all the recruiters will ask about this, and if it's something you know by heart, it's easier for you to get the interview started. Then other thing recruiters often ask on the first interview about salary expectations. So you can do two things. You can say, this is how much I want, or you can say, let's talk about this later after the interview. So for trying to postpone it to later point is a good idea when you just start a new field and you don't really know the market and how much companies are willing to pay, and or when you relocate or things like this. And when you already work, sometimes it's just helpful to already have a number and then just tell it, and this makes the process smoother for both sides. Regardless of which way you choose, you should do some research and have a number in mind, because recruiters can be pushy, and if you say, let's talk about this later, they don't take this as an answer and just push until you say a number. Then the next step after the recruiter is satisfied with what they hear is a screening session with theory. So these are theoretical data science and machine learning questions like what is linear regression, what is overfitting, what is the RSE curve, and things like this. So when they ask something like this, especially if it's happening over Zoom or a phone, the person on the other side doesn't expect a detailed answer. Something just in a few sentences that answers the question on the intuitive level without going deep into mathematics. And especially when it happens over the phone, you cannot really do this. Sometimes interviewers ask things that you don't know about. This is totally fine. Just be upfront about this, say, sorry, I don't know about this. And then interviewers will just give you a hint or say, okay, let's try another question. I prepared a list of data science questions that I got asked, and I also ask, and I see other people in my company ask. So if you want to prepare for this kind of interview, you can go there and check. It's only questions without answers, so it's a good idea to actually go through these questions and find the answers yourself. But there is also a GitHub repository with the same questions and answers. So these answers are some people like you who are also preparing for the interviews. They just went here and gave the answers. So if you want to use it, handle it with care. But maybe it can also give you a good hint how to answer these questions. The next part is coding screening. This is a technical screening. While the previous one was theory, this is more hands-on. It also often happens online when an interviewer just shares a link with you, and then you code in something like CodeShare, or sometimes can be a Google Doc. Sometimes it can happen on site, and then it happens on the whiteboard. And then usually there are multiple parts. So for a data scientist position, SQL and Python are important things. Some companies think that the data scientist is also a software engineer, and then they check computer science basics. So SQL part is they just, okay, here is some data, some schema, and then they ask you to write some queries to get some data in a certain form from this schema. Then for coding, it's typically a simple task just to check if a candidate knows the basics of Python or whatever the company is using. So typically it's a rather simple question just to check if a candidate knows the basics structures, data structures in Python, like lists, sets, dictionaries, can write loops, if statements, and things like this. But then there is also, as I said, some companies think that a data scientist is a software engineer who can also do machine learning. And then such companies often ask algorithmic questions. So things like, okay, flip a binary tree or rotate a linked list, and things like this. So before you rush into preparing this, check with the recruiter if this is actually a step you need to be preparing for, because as I said, very few companies do this, but they do. And if you do prepare, then lead code is the great resource for preparing for these kind of questions. And when you prepare, when you train and do this, when you solve these exercises, take notes to be able to come back to these notes and review later when next time you practice. So this is how I do this. Just outline of the idea about the coding, and this is something I can return in 1 year and then look it over and then understand what the idea of the algorithm is, just to keep it, to refresh it in my mind. So for this SQL and coding questions, I also prepared a list that you can go and check and practice, also with SQL, with simple Python questions, and with algorithm questions. And again, there is a GitHub repo with the answers that you can use. Then often after initial screening, a company sends a home assignment. So a home assignment is a task you need to do at home. So they just give you some data set, either a public data set from Kaggle or from somewhere else, or a private data set. And then they ask using this data set to write some code to do something, like train a model that does something. So examples from my personal experience is one chatbot company asked, given a free free text question, find the best answer. Then other project was about predicting the price of a car. And then other project was classify if a listing of an apartment is low interest, middle interest, or high interest. There are many other examples. So for example, one of these home assignments was, here is a data set with cars and their prices. And then the question, what can you do with this data set? And then pick one of these cases and describe how you can train a model, what this model would do, and then actually go and implement this, and then explain all the choices you made, and describe how you would continue this project if you had more time. So this is a pretty typical home assignment task. But I have to warn you, because in my experience, many times you work on a home assignment. First, they are quite time consuming, and often you develop a perfect solution and then you get rejected anyways. So there are some things that you need to watch out when they happen. Try to decide for yourself if you really want to invest time into home assignments or not. Often when you apply to a job, you get immediately an automatic mail with a home assignment. That's the worst situation, because maybe the company is not hiring, they just have the listing out there for whatever reason. Then sometimes you get an instructions, some instructions, and then some things are not clear. And then you get back to the company asking, hey, this is not clear. And then they say, yes, but this is on purpose. We just want to see how you deal with ambiguity. And then this is another red flag, because often you do not know what the person who is checking this expects to see. And if you take something that they something different from what they have in mind, then you might get rejected. So also think about this. And sometimes the task is, they say, could be solved in just 2 hours, but it actually requires a few weeks to finish it. So then also be careful. There are actually positive things about home assignments, because when you just look for a job and just start building your project portfolio, this is a great opportunity to actually add something, add another project into the portfolio, and then perhaps learn a new skill, new library, new model. When you have to deal with these home assignments, sometimes, for example, if you see some of the things I mentioned previously, sometimes maybe you don't want to invest time into this, but you still like the company and want to continue. You can just tell them about this, that sorry, I don't want to invest time into this, but I already have a few projects that are similar. Go check my GitHub. I'll be happy to continue talking to you without the assignment. Of course, many companies will say, sorry, no, and then basically that's the end of that. But sometimes they will agree and move on. After the assignment is done, there is a defense session sometimes, and if a company has this defense session, it's actually a good sign. And then during this defense session, you present your solution, and then you get some questions, and then discuss the solution. So when I was interviewing a while ago, I got many home assignments, and I put them together so you can go and check. And this is quite a useful thing to have, because when I get a new assignment, I can just refer to this and say, this is something similar I have done in the past. Go and check it and see if you like it or not. So sometimes some of the companies have case study interviews. So this is similar to some extent to home assignments, but they don't require like no code is expected. It's more like a discussion on how to approach things. And the idea is to test how what would be the proposed steps to solve this case study. So a typical data science project involves multiple steps, and on this diagram, this is a CRISP DM. This is a special process for data science projects, and you can just read more about this process and try to take some problem and then try to map try to think what would you do on each of these steps of this process. So example of case study can be, imagine that you want to build a model for predicting car prices, what you would do. Or sometimes it can be very ambiguous, like we want to increase user engagement, how to do this. And then in the first case, it's more straightforward. You just ask what kind of data is available and things like this. But in case it's more vague, you need to ask, okay, how do we measure user engagement? What users do on our platform? And then, so you need to engage in conversation. What I found useful for these case studies is to start with a simple baseline. You just say, okay, when we predict a model, we first do something. When we build a model, we first start with something simple. Then we quickly iterate and roll it out to production, and then we improve and use other more complex models. To prepare for this kind of interviews, pet projects is the best way to prepare. But also, for example, if you don't have any ideas for pet projects, or maybe you don't have enough pet projects, you can find them on Kaggle. It's a platform for data science competition, either by taking part there, which is good but quite time consuming, or just learning from the past competitions. So for example, go to Kaggle, find a few competitions that you like, that already happened, that are already over, and then try to understand what is the problem that the organizers were trying to solve. What kind of data they prepared, what kind of features are in this data, what is the target, and what is most important, what is the evaluation metric, how they want to decide what is the best the best model. And then also check the forums and see what the winners used in their solution. Not just winners, but just go on forums and see what are the solutions there. And this gives you a lot of material for such case studies. After the case study interview, there is a system design interview, which more focuses on engineering side. So examples like design Instagram, design Pastebin, design a system for online library. So this is typically this is what software engineers get when they interview. So in traditional system design, these are questions like design image board, but for machine learning engineers and for data scientists, examples involve, of course, machine learning, like design a system for duplicate detection, design a spam detection system, or design search autocomplete. And this is what I showed in my previous presentation. So this could be a good example of the solution to these kind of questions. Of course, I made this question up. Nobody asked me to design a system for dealing with duplicates, but it's possible. And then to approach this, you need to ask as many questions as possible from the interviewers, then try to collect them, break down the system into components. Then when you do this, you will need to make some decisions, like whether to use a relational database or non-relational database. You have to explain the reasoning to the interviewers, and then think what happens if load increases 10 times. So these are tricky ones to prepare too, because it requires a lot of expertise, a lot of experience. So the best way to prepare for these interviews is do these things at work. So pet projects, they often don't focus on the production part, and this is what these things test: engineering and production. But you can still learn some things from Google. Just look up system design interview Twitter, and then you'll see a bunch of videos that explain how to design Twitter. Then go to conferences, read blogs, and then before interviewing at a particular company, check their tech blog. Like for example, in case of OLX, you can check the duplicate detection system, and then if they ask, you can just use that. This is typically not for junior positions, but as seniority increases, they tend to appear more often. I don't know if anyone is actually asking this for juniors, but it's potentially possible. And then the difference between case studies and system design is if we look at the process for machine learning projects. So case studies, they focus more on the initial steps, like trying to formulate a problem in such a way that we can use machine learning to solve it. And then system design is, okay, now we already formulated the problem, how we go about productionizing it. And then the last thing, I don't have much time left. The last thing is behavioral interview. So this is to see if there is cultural fit between the company and the candidate. And this is typically like, tell me about time when you disagreed with somebody, mentored somebody, needed to go beyond your duties, or things like this. The best way to prepare for these kind of questions is do some research in advance and check if the company has so-called company's values publicly available. And then for each of the values, think of 2-3 situations when you showed this value. And then for each of the situations, try to describe it in so-called STAR principle. I have an example here. Like, for example, I had a problem with some library, but nobody knew this library and nobody could help me. So, but I still needed to fix this problem because it was blocking my progress. I found an online course and took it, and then I fixed the problem and showed others how to do this. So try to structure your answers in this format. And then when you prepare for these questions, also during preparation, try already to structure it. And then if a company doesn't have the values online, many don't, the safest bet is to check Amazon's values, because they're pretty good. They have like 14 leadership principles. And then for each of the leadership principle, this is like their value, try to come up with a few cases how you show this value. Then once after the interview, there are 2 outcomes. One is positive, you get an offer, and second is negative. The hiring team decided not to move forward. Don't take failures personally, and I always treat them as a good learning experience, because you still learn. You learn what kind of questions they ask, what kind of people they want to hire, And then just do a retrospective after this, try to understand what went wrong. Often nothing was wrong with you personally, so it was just somebody was better, or they ran out of money, or whatever. And then the important thing is to learn from this, and then try to see how you can do better next time. And then perhaps you see that if you lack some skill, then try to improve the skill, build a project, and share it. When you get an offer, great, but don't rush into agreeing immediately. And if you have other interviews started with other companies, finish them first, and then decide which offer to take. But the important thing, once you get the first offer, immediately tell others that, hey, I now have an offer, can we move faster? Once you have multiple offers, that's ideal situation, then you can really negotiate your salary and other benefits. If you don't have many offers, if you just have one, then it's very difficult to negotiate. Probably you'll have to agree to whatever they give you. If you already said a number in the initial interview and they offered that number, then there is no way back to undo this. It will be very difficult to try to get a better number. A few articles I really like, so I'll share the slides with you, then go check on how to go about salary negotiation. And I think that's it from my side. So just want to summarize this quickly. So when you look for a job, network as much as possible, apply even if you're not qualified, build projects, interview, and do a retrospective after each interview. Rejections happens, don't take them personally. When it comes to expected salary expectations, you don't have to tell it up front, but it's good to have a number in mind. Then you should practice theory, should practice coding. Then be careful with home tests, but they are also a good opportunity to learn. For case studies, it's good to learn from data science competitions, and for behavioral questions, prepare stories in the star format. And then at the end, try to get more than one offer before agreeing to it. I think that's one of the last slides. So I mentioned multiple times that there is a GitHub repo with interview questions and answers. Maybe it will be helpful for you. Please check. And then I'm working on a book right now for machine learning. The idea is to learn machine learning by doing projects. So if you want, you can check it. And if you're interested, let me know and I can arrange a free copy for you. If you have any questions, you can ask now or contact me by email. Yeah, thank you.